This episode deals with how to draw basic primitive geometric shapes and then how to give them a three-dimensional look through shading. Second half of the episode, we're going to be using these primitives to create a character. Now, here's some of the recommended materials: plastic covering on surfaces, and we've got cheap builder's paper. The materials: vine or willow charcoal, compressed charcoal, we've got chalk, a hanky, it's good to blend, and primitive shapes: cube, a dog bowl, that's my Dobie's bowl there, tin of soup, and this little bendy wire. I'm using paper that I've already used before. I like reusing things when I can, and reusing them, it just saves material. And hey, the drawing underneath, it gives it texture. So what I'm going to be doing to start off with here, break your fine charcoal up, okay? It's not a pencil, so don't treat it like one. So it breaks off, you keep those pieces. So I'm going to start drawing a cube shape flat on the ground. So basically like a square. And that square helps me decide on now giving it the volume. That's the Z-axis there. I'm going straight up, or Z-axis. And then with those lines going straight up, I draw that flat square shape again on its side. Okay? And then it's easy to draw the sides of that cube. So the reason we do that is we need to approximate the scale and size of that object quickly. Okay? Now there's the shadow. I just draw again, I repeat that same flat square shape on the ground, and it's easier then to figure out the shadow if I do that. So by doing a lined outline first, it's easier for me to understand the geometry. Now I'm going to add some shading, some value. And I block it in really quick at the beginning. Just learn to work quickly. It's why I use charcoal so much for this. It's fast. It's 10 times quicker than a pencil for me. It's easier to spread. Now this hanky, you can see, then I can just smooth out how that charcoal is laid down on the paper. It's pushing it into the tooth of the paper. Now I'm giving some slightly darker edges. So what I'm trying to create here is that the edges which are closest will be stronger. So I'm going to start to blend and work that in. Now that bit of charcoal there, well actually what I'm using is I'm using an eraser, and that takes off that area. Now I want to get where the light's bouncing around the environment. Do you see what my lines now have all disappeared? So it's starting to look three-dimensional in a very short space of time because of those fundamental principles. I'm just going to work that edge again. And this comes through practice. This is a craft, this is a trade. The edge that's closest to us is darkest. I'm using a compressed charcoal, now back to my willow charcoal. The compressed charcoal I use very sparingly. Okay, my chalk now, that shows where the radiosity or the light bouncing from the block onto the floor is happening. So I take it away with the eraser first, soften the edge, and I'm trying to figure out the light and dark values quickly. Again, my compressed charcoal, it's a very dark value. And now that edge looks like it's getting closer. Also, the shadow that's closer to the object will be darker. Again, the handkerchief, such a great tool, just softening that shadow area and the value and your darks and lights. It's beautiful at blending. Very simple tool, cheap, kitchen towel, handkerchief, paper napkin. Again, blending with your fingers. You will get your fingers dirty. Make sure there's no grease. Make sure with your finger's clean, you don't have any grease on it. Once the grease gets on the paper, it's harder to work with. But it's great for blending, it's sensitive. And look at that fall off. Okay, so those bits of chalk, I'm doing it the top edge, it gives a nice fall off, right? It's not just a consistent value of white. And I'm not pressing hard with the chalk. It's very gently pressed. And this handkerchief helps blend that in. So that's where the light's bouncing and hitting the floor from the cube. Okay, so on to the next primitive object, which is the dog's ball. My Doberman's favorite ball. It squeaks, she loves that. Anyway, it was convenient. I'll give it back after I finish, promise. So look what I did with the circle there for the shadow, and then the circle for the ball. So the direction of light coming from left to right there. And I give an overall rub with the charcoal at first, just blocking in that carbon around the paper, because it's easier now for me to start to blend that. And at the harder edge on the outside, it's furthest away from the light, and kind of the core part of the shadow there, because of the shape of the ball and the direction of the light. Got one main source of light, but there is other light bouncing into the scene. So what's really fascinating about this exercise, you're actually learning about science and light and its behavior. The better informed you are about science, the more effective you will be as a designer or an artist. Now, blending those things in, so you can see I can soften that edge just using my finger covered with the paper towel there, and then using it to spread. And you can see already I'm starting to get a volumetric effect, right? And that dark edge is on the outside of where the shadow is. So it will be darker closer to the ball. Now the compressed charcoal I put in there is going to be a much darker value. So again, gently blending that in will help. Again, I'm very sparing with that. This is a technique you'll learn with practice. It's a very simple way of blending, but it takes practice. Like a plumber, carpenter, you know, it's a skill that takes time. It doesn't happen instantly. It's not instant coffee. And that's why people pay them to do the work, right? Because other people can't do it. So these are the type of skills that you're learning with your drawing, is how do you make you a living. So the eraser here is taken off where the carbon is because I want to put the chalk in that area. That's why I'm using the eraser first, and then well, I'm going to use it a bit more here. I'm taking off the top part of the shadow because there's light bouncing in there on the edge of the ball because of the shape, and you see you got real change in the shadow. Makes it interesting, doesn't it? And then I soften it again with a hanky. So this bit of chalk here is showing the specular highlight, brightest part where the light's hitting the object. I'm going to blend that as well. You know, this was a medium that was taught for a long time. This has been around a long time, this medium, for a reason. It's so quick and simple. You know, pencils didn't come in till later, 17th, 18th century. Before that, they were using silver point, very difficult medium. So charcoals, carbons and chalks have been around a lot longer. And, well, as you can see, they're pretty effective for a reason. They're fast. There's the radiosity, the light off the ball hitting the ground. So I get that effect, but I have to blend it because at the minute it's too stark. But look what that little change does. It pops the ball forward. It makes it much more three-dimensional. And then taking that edge there with the eraser. eraser, it's taken off the edge, making it a little sharper, and then back in with my hanky softening. So you can see I'm going between eraser, handkerchief. Okay, my cylinder, start with the oval shapes, top and bottom. It's fast. You want speed. Time is money when you're working in this business. You've got to get stuff done quickly. Here, the other oval, well, I'm going to change that a bit more. So that's the other thing, lots of iteration. Iteration means lots of changes. Get used to it. You'll be constantly changing, having art directors telling you to change your work. So you can't be too personal about things. You have to learn. So there's the core shading there, the value. The value, because it's cylindrical, you get that type of shading. Lots of fall off, it's not consistent. And then this blending occurs. I'm gently pressing with the handkerchief. Very simple method. It's a lot of fun. And then blocking in where that shadow is, but I had to start with the shapes first. So you can see all three primitives started with the same method. Simple outline, a geometric outline showing all of the sides of the shape, even the side of the shape we couldn't see. So just strengthening the line, making it a bit darker. Things that are closer are going to have stronger contrast and values from lights and darks. But at first, you're trying to block those shapes in because you know you can always blend. Look at that, a lot stronger. And again, I'm going to have to blend that in. So again, a lot of this is going over layers and layers. But this is a method that's fast because I'm blocking in big areas with napkins, my finger, and charcoal. So I'm really going for speed, efficiency. So the eraser that I'm using is taking off that bit of carbon, getting me the side, and there where the light is hitting that top lip on the can. Again, softening that edge, right? Being little bit more delicate. So it's a little bit of craft coming in here in terms of technical skill that you're developing. This is a technical skill. And that's the carbon coming in. That carbon stick is a lot stronger. And I want it closer to the can to be darker. And that can vary depending on where other light sources are bouncing. So you're being a bit of a scientist. So your observation here is important. The more you observe about your world, the more that it can inform you on how things work. So same with this, and same with being an artist or a designer. You're paying attention to your surroundings. So the eraser there, I got to think of the highlights where I'm going to put down that chalk, where the light is bouncing from the cylinder onto the ground. And then the strongest part of light hitting that cylinder. You see that? Two specific areas, the lip and the side of the can where the light's coming from. But it's not to the edge. You notice I don't take the shading to the edge of that cylinder. Now where the light's bouncing from the cylinder onto the ground, that's where I put the chalk. And again, I have to blend it. That's called radiosity. That would be a scientific term. The radiosity of light. There are other terms that you might hear people use. Now that bright highlight is where the light's hitting the top of the rim. So where you put detail, it's really important. And now that strong light, because that's looking metallic without the label, isn't it? And I'm not drawing the details of the label because, well, it overcomplicates things. We've got to establish the form and the value before we ever think about detail. So this exercise is great for establishing basics. So I want to throw in quickly here some negative space. In other words, very, very dark value behind the object. So this is a trick. And what this creates is a much more three-dimensional shape because it contrasts with the lighter values which are on the object. So I just want to quickly demonstrate the effectiveness of this technique. It's carbon charcoal that I'm putting down, and so I have to be careful where I'm going to blend it. Okay, I don't want it going into my object. I'm just trying to keep loosely around the edge. Don't try to be too finicky with that edge, okay? Doesn't matter. You're just gently blocking it in, and you notice there's a lot of energy and rhythm to that. I'm not worried about it being consistently a dark value throughout the whole drawing. It falls off, right? Falling off means it's going dark to light is I'm blending in with the handkerchief. Same with the edge there of the can. And I gotta just blend, experiment a little bit. And again, a lot of this is, it's really an adventure. I'm trying to figure out. And there's the finished piece. On to our next bit. Next bit of the episode now is using those basic primitive shapes for character. That there is a line of action. I'm going to put my primitive shapes along those lines of action. And there's the can, and I'm bending it a bit, you notice, because I'm trying to get it to follow that line. And there's the squiggly wire that I'm using as reference. And then adapting it to think about if this tin can had legs. And there's my cube shape, and that cube shape. The practice here is repeating those shapes over and over again, and it becomes muscle memory. In other words, it becomes an instinct, and that's what you want this type of drawing to become, instinctive. I'm trying to think from one side to the other where the arms would go. So I draw through the shape and think about where that would attach. And he's kind of in a dance. These are pretty whimsical poses I'm doing. You can think of a scene that your character could be in. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm just being very whimsical here. Okay, and there's the bottom end there, the cube this time. And I'm trying to think the character sitting on the cube. So there's the primitive used as a seat. Again, the cylinder bottom half and the cube the top half for the torso area. That little circle on the cube there is to indicate where the arms are going to come out of, okay? And then the squiggly wires for the neck somehow attached into the cube. So there's the arm, and it's, I guess, hand resting on the cube. Fairly organic, simple shape, okay? Keep it simple. Those little indicators are where the legs are going to come out of, right? That's a small cube to sit on. It looks awkward, doesn't it? Creates tension. And that's good. It creates more intrigue for the viewer. So a simple exercise like this is great for pushing your skills. And it seems a bit uncomfortable if you've never done it before, because it might be out of your comfort zone, and this is good. This is how we're going to grow our skills, become more confident, and then you can become more ambitious when that confidence grows. So there's you notice the sphere for the ball at the top for the head, just keeping it real simple again. Now the tin can's on top of the cube. Do you notice that? So I kind of switched which primitive shape becomes the hip region and which primitive shape becomes the torso region. I'm going to carry this on with the next character here. That switch. Got another 2 characters to do. So practice, practice, and more practice. And those little indicators are where the legs are going to come out of. I'm trying to get more of a dance with this character here. And I'm always trying to get different poses of the same shape, so it gets me more comfortable with understanding the different shapes and how much I can push a pose of a character. The thing is for this exercise is to have fun, since we've done our primitive objects. So you notice that outline and the cylinder. Try to keep it whimsical. Don't overwork the line too much. Don't worry too much about that. This is just going to be practice and lots of repetition. I tried to get a knee bend idea with the legs, but I'm not over worried about that. And now figuring out where the arms are going to come out of at the top of that tin can. So very anthropomorphic. In other words, these basic primitive shapes make up a human character in terms of its gesture and the overall look, even though they're just simple shapes. This is going to be where the light source is going to be pushing from top to the bottom on my character. So that's what that's indicating there. Where's the source of light? It's really important to establish your direction of light, because now you can think of how you're going to add the values. Where do I shade? Where do I leave it clear? Another reason for using a mid-tone paper range is that I have a middle tone, and that means I can work out to the light and work out to the darks, as opposed to a blank white piece of paper where you're always working out to the darks. So it creates an effect because we have a tonal range already put down for us. Again, blending those shapes in with my finger. Pretty simple, right? We don't have to use too much carbon. Again, always trying to keep things simple. And you go for speed. For this business, there's a high volume of work. You don't have time to go through. In other words, you don't have time to spend too much adding detail. The gesture concept stage is about blocking things down really quickly. We're not really illustrators, but illustrator skills are useful for the more detailed finish work. So the chalk, well, I'm going to try to be careful with this. Be sparing with the chalk. Don't stick it everywhere. Remember, it's the highest parts of where the light's heading your shape. It doesn't go all over your character. Because once you start throwing it on recklessly, it can start to lose the idea of 3 dimensions. So you can be spontaneous, but it's strategic. I'm putting them in places where I think the light's mostly going to be hitting them. And as a result, you can see that those primitive shapes beginning to become more 3-dimensional. And the whites there I'm using on the bendy wire for the ligaments, the legs and the arms. It's starting to bring them out too. It's an approximation, remember. It's not an exact drawing of something, it's an approximation. And why is that important for concept? Because it's fast. So this gesture style drawing is allowing me to make quick decisions. And that's what really drawing is it's a series of decisions. How many decisions are we going to make to create a finished look or product of something? Well, we want to make them efficiently. So we got to understand what it is we're drawing, how to describe the shapes, how to describe the lights and dark to give it a feeling of 3-dimensional volume. So these are repeating themes. I'm using a repeating theme that I did in the previous drawing. And what I'm doing now is applying that knowledge to this imaginative view of what these characters would be if they were these primitive shapes. So that imagination comes from observation. Last 5 minutes of the episode, I can add a little tiny bit more detail, but it's more to do with the value as opposed to any texture that I might want to suggest with these characters. So these initial gesture drawings are just that. They're the very first stage of the character's evolution that might be for a film, a game, or an animation. These are the very first steps of trying to get an indication to what type of character it's going to look like. And that line there shows almost a metallic effect, doesn't it? Now those little beads of highlight are the shiniest parts of the object. And I put it at a little bit of an angle. Okay, and then a little bit more blending. Again, keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate this. Don't do more detail than you need to. Don't waste time putting detail where it's not really going to be noticed or add to the overall look of the character. That darker core shading adds a bit. I don't know, with the chalk maybe on that might work, but you notice I'm kind of reluctant. But that there is like what you call rim lighting, where the highlight is hitting the edge of that shape in shadow. And that creates a three-dimensional effect, doesn't it? So that's what I'm really serving here, is creating a volumetric effect, a three-dimensional effect. And this is a flat piece of paper. So these technical skills that we're developing help us conceptualize an idea quickly. And we started with these three shapes here: cube, a sphere, and a cylinder. That's what those characters are made out of. But look at the variety of different gestures they're making. And then that, of course, for the arm and leg, that bit of bendy wire. I got it from a scrapyard. It was out of a car, an electrical component, something to do with the engine. Okay, so negative space here. Great tool for giving things an extra feeling that they're in an atmosphere, that it's not just a blank space. And it's a very stylized approach. It's very gestured, right? So I'm just blocking that in just to push out those shapes. You can see around the shoulders and head. It creates an effect where it looks like they're coming off the page. And again, the key here is speed, because once you've done a few drawings to get used to the feel of the character, then the idea is then you get on to maybe more different treatments on your character that would be from a script. And just blending that in. Now think if I'd been using pencil for the same thing, it would take me longer. So for demonstration purposes, the charcoal, carbon, vine, willow charcoal are so fast. But look at those negative shapes, pushing those characters forward. Hope you enjoyed that. Here's a 1-minute time-lapse film.